Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure people are still going to be logging on in the next minute or two, but I think we should get started. Welcome. My name is Liliana Lengua. I'm the director of the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing. Our mission is to promote the well-being of children by supporting the social emotional skills, well-being, and mindfulness of the adults in their lives and in the communities in which they live. One way we do this is through implementation and evaluation of well-being promotion interventions for professionals working with children, youth, families, as well as for parents, youth, and young adults. Another way we accomplish our goals is through our public lectures and professional workshops that share research-based approaches to supporting child and family well-being, and that is the goal of this evening's panel. I'm going to start by giving a few logistic instructions. Our panel discussion is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording in a few days. After the lecture, you're also going to receive an email with a feedback survey, and we really appreciate your feedback on our events to help us plan for future events. We're going to have some time for questions and answers at the end. I'm going to ask that you type your questions for the panel in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat. However, if you are having technical issues or you're having trouble hearing any of our panel members, please put those issues in the chat. Our team is monitoring the chat for technical issues. I'm going to start this evening with a land and labor acknowledgement. I ask that all of you engaged in this event with us to reflect with gratitude on the lands on which we work and live, and acknowledge all of the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have lived here for many, many generations. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, all the tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We offer our gratitude and respect to their elders and honor their past, present, and future connections to this land. We acknowledge and pay respect to the people whose forced labor this nation was built upon. We recognize that painful histories of white supremacy persist in present-day racial realities and privileges at this university, in our communities, and in our nation. We invite all to commit to dismantling racism and oppression by creating change where we live and work. I want to thank our co-host this evening, Dr. Astrid Newell from the Department of Health, and invite Astrid to offer us a welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to this conversation tonight. On behalf of the Thriving Children and Youth section of the Washington State Department of Health, I'm really excited to serve as a co-host for this important conversation focused on the impacts of technology in the lives of children, youth, and families. Our work in the Thriving Children and Youth section at Department of Health focuses on promoting the conditions that children, youth, and families need to be healthy and thrive. Some of that work emphasizes the quality of healthcare and access to information, while other parts are really focused on understanding and addressing community and societal factors that influence child, youth, and family health. This includes consideration of how technology and evolving digital environments are impacting child, youth, and family well-being. Several years ago, pre-pandemic, I was preparing a presentation about mental health across the lifespan for a group of public health colleagues, and I discovered an area of research that I wasn't familiar with. That research focused on the concept of technoference. Technoference refers to how technology and our patterns of technology use, like frequent checking of phones and messages, can disrupt interpersonal interactions and interfere with relationships, social connections, and things like parenting, which are so central to healthy development and well-being. So I'm especially excited to have one of the co-authors of one of those studies, Dr. McDaniel, on the call tonight, on the panel tonight. We as a society continue to experience significant change related to technology. The pandemic influenced how we use and rely on technology, and our society's technological capabilities continue to grow rapidly. During these last few years, issues related to technology and health have received increased public health attention, and both from the perspective of leveraging technology to support health and healthy behaviors, and from the perspective of potential harms to that public's health, especially for children and youth. In both 2023 and 2024, our nation's top public health official, the former U.S. Surgeon General, released 4 advisories and calls to action related to important public health topics, including youth mental health broadly, social media and youth mental health, the epidemic of loneliness and social isolation, and parental stress. Each of these advisories touch in some way on the role of technology in health. This panel tonight, focused on parents and teens on screens, is one opportunity to explore these topics in greater depth. I'm grateful to the panelists for being here today to share your expertise with us, as well as for everyone on participating in the audience. We look forward to hearing your questions and your thoughts. Thank you. I'll pass it back.
Thanks, Astrid. Yeah, so our questions this evening for the panel came from parents and youth in the community. And so we'll start with the questions that we already received from parents and youth, and then open up to your questions at the end. I also want to acknowledge One World Now for soliciting questions from their families. So let me give a very brief introduction of our panel members, and then I'm going to turn it over to them to tell you more about themselves and their work. Dr. David Levy is a professor emeritus of University of Washington's Information School, whose interests and work has addressed the ethics and practices in the information world, as well as mindfulness, health, and well-being in technology and information use. Dr. Lucía Magis-Weinberg is an assistant professor in the University of Washington's Psychology Department. She studies how adolescent technology and media use relates to their social emotional development. And Dr. Brandon McDaniel, who's joining us here tonight from the Eastern Time board, so late at night there, is a research scientist at the Parkview Research Center, whose research focuses on individual, relational, and family well-being in relation to technology use. So I gave very brief introductions so that they could each tell you a little bit more about themselves. And I'll invite Lucía to start us off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lily, for that introduction. And it's a delight being with all of you here to talk about this very, very important topic. So I really thank you for the invitation. Yes, so I lead the Interact Lab, which stands for the International Adolescent Connection and Technology Laboratory, where I have been studying for the past years, really all to do with adolescent use of technology in relation to their mental health, focusing a lot on mostly anxiety and depression, what we call the mood disorders. The bulk of my work has focused on Latin America and other underrepresented populations. And my work has 2 arms. The first arm is to really try to understand how these youth in Latin America are using technology, the benefits and risks it poses to their development and their mental health, and then work with schools and take this information that we've learned from research and incorporate it into school workshops to promote what we call digital citizenship, which is the broad set of skills that we need to use to interact with the online, the digital world in ways that are smart, in ways that are safe, in ways that are meaningful. And we'll keep coming back to these words of safe and meaningful in the rest of the conversation, I'm sure. So we've been doing a lot of work with schools to do these workshops and promote these skills, which include balance and well-being, privacy and security, managing our digital footprints, how to be respectful online, how to deal with cyberbullying and digital drama, for example, digital literacy. So we've been doing that work for a few years now. After I joined the Department of Psychology here in Seattle, we started working with youth in the United States, mostly in Washington State. So we are currently launching a project in which we are improving our methods. We'll talk later in the questions about how many of the research questions we're asking, we are not really using the best methods we can to answer these questions, and that has been a problem, I think, in our field. So we are just launching this very ambitious project in which we will follow 300 youth in Washington State very intensely. So over the course of a month, we're going to be sending them surveys 4 times per day. Because one problem with digital media is that we're really accessing it real time, 24/7. And when we tend to use questionnaires that ask you, well, in the past month, how have you felt online, or how have you felt your digital stress online? It's not really capturing this real-time aspect of social media. So we want to be asking people constantly. So we'll be doing that for a month. So very intensely asking people about their online experiences to hopefully get a better picture of what youth are doing online. And another project that I'm very excited about is a project on investigating the impact of smartphone bans in schools. Probably many of you in the audience, your schools have recently changed their policies to be perhaps more strict about banning the phones, whether it's in the classroom or fully from school. So that's a change that we're seeing across the United States and the world very recently, and we really want to investigate the impact of these policies on youth. Yeah, so those are the three main areas of research in my lab. And the main message that we have found is that it's really, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to social media. There's youth who tremendously benefit from social media, youth who are put at a lot of risk, youth for whom the impact isn't very big. So we really need to understand, okay, for whom is social media beneficial, for whom is social media perhaps more harmful, and how can we design interventions to both extract the most positive of the online world and minimize the negatives. I think maybe I'll stop there and I'll let other people contribute, but we'll keep talking about more research findings later.
Thanks, Lucia. It's so helpful to hear about your different projects. Brandon, let's turn to you.
So, hi, everyone. I'm Brandon McDaniel, Senior Research Scientist at the Parkview Murrow Center for Research and Innovation here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So I apologize if I look a little sleepy as it keeps getting later and later. But I've been studying parenting, family relationships, and technology use for over 15 years now. I've just always had a fascination with the ways that technology intersects with family life and what that might mean, how it's used, the influences on the quality of parenting or family relationships over time. So also, I just want to say, back when I really started on a lot of this, the focus was where I think our focus is a lot of the time is we're often really worried about our children, child media use specifically, whereas I was trying to flip that narrative a little bit and get people thinking a lot more about that as parents, our own device use also can have a pretty large impact on our own mental health and well-being, which then can influence our children and infant development and all of these aspects over time. So now there's a lot of people looking at that now, so it's really great to see. But around 2012, like was said already, I coined the term technoference because I was looking around and seeing everyone so engrossed in their devices and just beginning to wonder what that might mean for family relationships, whether that's relationships between romantic partners or if that's parent-child relationships or other relationships. And so that's just the words technology and interference popped together. And it really describes how technology can intrude or interrupt in our face-to-face interactions and time and that time spent together. So then across like the last 13 years or so, it's been found well, we've in our research really found that the more that technoference is happening, the less satisfied people are in relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or in parent-child relationships, the more excluded they feel. We see that children often will react to their parents' device use. Young children might react in ways, show externalizing types of behaviors like acting out. They may also begin to change how they view themselves and almost withdraw into their own technology sometimes, depending upon the habits of their parents. So none of that's particularly surprising, I would say, at this point now. But back when we began studying it, it really wasn't clear if these sort of everyday minor intrusions and interruptions, like you just got on your smartphone for 5 seconds to check something and then got back into the interaction, whether that would really mean anything in terms of long-term lasting impact. So across the last 5 years, I've also focused a lot on parent smartphone habits specifically, and their use around their infants and what that might mean for infant development and parent mental health and parenting behavior. And there's, like Lucia was saying, it's really difficult for individuals to be able to remember their habits, or you might think that you can do that, but it's just not accurate when you're trying to report on all of that. So I often use a lot of complex data streams to try to figure this out, like installing an app on parents' smartphones and having it track their use continuously across an entire week. And at the same time, every night they're completing time diaries or nightly surveys, and us being able to link all these data streams together to get a much better picture of what it looks like and when they're using their device, and are they around their infant or not? Are they feeding their infant, and all that that might mean? And we really see that that phone use is quite common. On average, 27% of time spent with the infant is the parent is also on their smartphone. But that really, there are a lot of different patterns that we see too. So again, that it's not really one size fits all. And there's some that are using their phone 5 or 10% of the time that they're around their infant, and you've got others that are doing it more like 70 to 80% of the time that they're around their infant. And what's really astounding though, as we dove into this, is because we're trying to figure out ways to help parents and families to develop healthier digital habits. And what we found was, regardless of whether you're low user, heavy user, or whatever you might be, many, the vast majority of parents are dissatisfied with some aspect of their phone habits and desire to change some part of that. And the feelings around that device use are really complex, where there's a lot that can be gotten out of that, a sense of empowerment and support, and much that we'll probably talk a lot more about tonight. And at the same time, this sense of guilt and shame around having gotten on the device around their child. So anyway, I could go on, but overall, my work really suggests that we do need to be mindful and aware of our habits, but at the same time, we can't treat all use as if it's equal. There's going to be good and bad inside of that, and we can't take that angle that all use is bad. The effects really are going to depend upon the content that's being used, the context of when that's happening, and what's going on.
Thanks, Brandon. I can't wait to get more into the details of what you're talking about. And David, why don't you share a little bit?
Great. Thank you, Lily. And hello, everyone. And Brandon, thank you for giving me a nice transition into some of what I was about to say, because you talked about the importance of mindfulness. Now, I come at this very important topic from a pretty different perspective than the two of you, in that, one, I'm a computer scientist by training. I've done a little bit of empirical work, but I don't primarily do that. I don't work with parents or teens. I have a lot. I essentially am or have become a philosopher of technology who's been looking very broadly at these trends stretching back hundreds of years and even longer, to try to understand what's going on historically and even existentially. So I'm trained as a computer scientist. I did my PhD in AI, in fact, at Stanford a long time ago. And then I worked for many years at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. Some of you will know that Xerox PARC is the think tank, Silicon Valley think tank, where the personal computer and many of the related technologies were finally integrated, and then through Apple and later Microsoft made their way into the larger corporate world and to all of us. So I spent basically 30 years in Silicon Valley from the age of 22. So I feel in some ways that I grew up right inside the belly of the beast, and have a lot to say about that, which I won't have much time to talk about tonight. But so how did I get to the University of Washington? Well, I decided to move on to essentially a second career, an academic career. And 25 years ago, in the year 2000, I took a position in the information school at the University of Washington. Now, what was it that I was going to work on? Well, I was already at that point a longtime meditator, and I'd really seen the transformation in myself that mindfulness practices and other contemplative practices had brought to me. And I was already beginning to ask the question, while I was still in Silicon Valley, what would a more contemplative perspective on our digital lives and digital futures look like? And what is probably most relevant to our conversation tonight is that in 2006, so almost 20 years ago, here at the University of Washington in the Information School, I created a course called Information and Contemplation. And basically the idea of that course was, I didn't know exactly what I was doing right at the beginning. One never does. But the idea was that if I could introduce students to certain mindfulness and other contemplative practices and could get them to slow down enough to observe themselves, pay attention to what was happening in their mind and body when they were online in various ways, what would happen? And what I discovered, first of all, was that they could do that and that they found it very interesting and sometimes surprising and shocking. So it was important to stress to them that this kind of paying attention to their own habits and their own behavior and their mind, that should be done in a non-judgmental way, at least as much as possible. And what I discovered was that as soon as people started noticing different aspects of their online behaviors, that they started coming back to class with suggestions for how they would change their behavior. Just the fact of observing began to suggest things that they could change. And then what I also discovered was that by doing it in a classroom or in a group setting, that people could learn from one another. They could learn that there were different ways that people behave, that one size does not fit all, but they could also learn, they could hear from other people, and they could support one another in the changes that they were trying to make. So so I have almost 20 years of doing that, not only in classes in the university, but workshops around the country and in lectures and so on, although not with anybody younger than probably 19 or 20, and not with a group of parents. The last thing I want to say, though, just to come back to the beginning, is that I have a longstanding, I'd say fairly critical view of the tech world. And I feel like I've earned it. I've lived inside of it for 50 years as a researcher, as a teacher. I actually joined a Silicon Valley startup at one point. I've had many roles in the tech world. And what really concerns me, and some of this may come into play in our questions tonight, is the way that digital culture is a speedy, accelerating culture. I'm concerned about the loss of time to think, and I'm also, as we all are today, recognizing that Silicon Valley, its consolidation of power, is I think a form of overreach as well. And one of the questions that I think we all need to hold is, how much power do we as ordinary users have? And I think we have a lot in relation to the power that we want to try to share with Silicon Valley and the makers of the technology. Anyway, that's what I have to say. Very much looking forward to the conversation we're about to have.
Thanks, David. I'm really looking forward to you bringing your perspective to this discussion. And as I said before, we got questions from our community members, and I put a couple of them together, and I'm going to ask each person to address them. And David, maybe you can start. One of the questions was, can you provide a sense of what adult, teen, and preteen screen time looks like in terms of what people are spending time doing on their devices, social media apps, and other? What is the recommended amount of time? And how do we know when it's too much time? So David, what do you think?
Great, thank you. Well, based on what I heard from Lucía and Brandon, I think the two of them would be better able to answer that first part, that they have a sense of the range of things that parents and teens are doing. So what I want to skip to are the questions about time. How do we know what's a reasonable amount of time and what's too much? Well, I've already signaled the approach that I have to offer, which is not the only one. but it's the one that I have cultivated over at least 20 years. It's the possibility that we ourselves can discover for ourselves when we're online too long, right? And in fact, I think I heard, Lucía, already that you want to get more fine-grained data from people online, and that's sort of related to what to my idea. So the question that I would pose to all of us about time is, well, what is your mind and body telling you right now about as you're online? And I offer people a very simple mindfulness practice I call the mindful check-in, which asks people first to notice the quality of their breathing, then their posture and other sensations in the body, their emotional state, and also the quality of their attention. These are for instances, right? And what I say to people is, you can turn your attention around and look at yourself, and you can discover certain things. So for example, in terms of how much time is the right amount of time, or should I stay online now, one can begin to notice that one's anxious. One can begin to notice that one's tired or fatigued. One can notice that one is not very attentive, that the quality of one's attention is not strong. And one can even notice that part of the reason one is online at this moment is to be distracted from something else that one doesn't want to pay attention to. These are just the kinds of things that one can begin to see. And then so those answers open up a range of possibilities. They open up a range of choices. Well, maybe I should go play with the dog now, or maybe I should go for a walk, or maybe I should make a cup of tea, or maybe I really need to and want to stay online, right? Mindfulness, it turns out, is so powerful in that it reveals, hopefully non-judgmentally, in ways that we can stand to pay attention to, who we are at the moment. And it opens up a range of choices which we don't have when we are just sort of mindlessly stuck on our phones or on our apps. So I will turn it over, Lily, to whoever's next.
Thanks. Yeah, Brandon, did you want to take that question?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, David. I really love that idea of mindfulness. So as I primarily study parents and parent screen use, I'll talk about that a little bit. So we find that parents spend about 4 to 6 hours per day just on their smartphone on average. Although that can really vary by, that average kind of masks the variability of what's really going on out there. You've got some parents that are only on their device for an hour per day or sometimes less. But then we also have those that are on it for 9, 10, 12, 15 hours. So overall screen habits can really look quite different depending upon the person. In our research specifically, we actually gathered a group of parents and did some complex modeling of their smartphone habits that we had assessed across 8 days, and found that there were 5 distinct groups of parents. There were heavy users, or these are what we called them anyway, heavy users, light users, and then these 3 groups of kind of moderate users that tended to differ on certain types of use. Like there was a moderate user group that tended to do a little bit more social networking. There was a moderate user group that tended to do more mobile gaming. And a moderate user group that engaged in some social media use, but also did a lot of video chatting or more video chatting. So it really can differ, okay, across parents. Then it's common for parents to use their phones for a variety of purposes, though, as we get into this idea of like what's the recommended amount of time or what's too much. We need to think about that. It's used for communication, it's used for entertainment, it's used for productivity, it's used for family scheduling and management of and reducing cognitive load around all of that. It's used for work, regulating emotions to cope with stress, and much, much more. So it's very clear that not all screen use is created equal. And to David's point, we really need to assess what is the purpose behind what we're doing here? Is that really accomplishing that goal? Are we really aware of what we're doing? And it's really heavily integrated into their lives is what I see. And that that I really wouldn't have like a specific screen time limit recommendation. Instead, I'd say what I often hear from parents is this growing concern over whether their device use is negatively influencing their own parenting or distracting them in some way from their child, which again, that displacement, we would often call this idea of technoference. So often to know whether it's too much, I think is being mindful enough, like David was saying, to begin to become aware and assess whether the device use that you're engaging in is often, and I would say, or frequently, interrupting and getting in the way of what you want it to be like as a parent. And leave it at that. Let someone else add to this.
Yeah, Lucía, what do you want to add?
Yeah, to add to what both panelists have said, we know that in youth, again, recreational use of smartphone is around 4.5 hours. So that's on top of other gaming platforms and on top of computer use or iPad use for homework or at school. So we are seeing 5 hours almost of use of smartphone per day. What's concerning to me is the statistic that they're receiving around 240 in average notifications per day. So these are like smartphones that are just going off constantly with notifications, trying to grab adolescents' attention. And as much as I want us to work towards mindfulness, and we'll come back to this, we are fighting manipulative design that is counter to that, right? So these very powerful tech companies are trying to grab our attention and our time. Youth describe using their smartphone as both background buzz, so they're listening to music, watching videos while they're doing homework, while they're doing laundry, house chores. So it's something that's constantly on. So what are those 5 hours? Is it just listening to Spotify, or is it actually actively engaging with friends? And another statistic is that they're doing 100 pickups on average per day. So David was talking about the importance of this sustained attention. How can we keep sustained attention to anything, whether it's our time with family or homework, time with friends, when we're constantly being manipulated by design to pay attention to these devices? And one thing that concerns us a lot is use at night, right? So this study by Common Sense estimates that 5% of these notifications are received at night. So youth are constantly 2 a.m., 3 a.m. receiving notifications from friends and expected to respond. Now, being a good friend means that you respond whenever your friend needs you. And of course, they're also receiving notifications during the school day. So I think I'll leave it at there, but we can come back to some of these statistics.
Wow. Thank you all. The second question from the audience starts with, screens, in quote, is too wide of a term and very demonized. I'd love for there to be a discussion about the difference of screen time as an umbrella term and social media specifically as a type of screen time, and then further breaking it down into the types of social media. Brandon, would you take that one first?
Yeah, love to. So yeah, I agree. Screen time, that term of screen time is often not a very useful term. And that's because what really matters is what's being done on the device, like the content and also the context of that use. So just to give an example kind of from the world that I'm often engaged in and studying, we could consider two mothers. One who gets on her smartphone while playing with her young child to find a fun activity to be able to engage with her child. And so that empowers her in that moment, and she's able to then re-engage, and they're able to do something fun together and get playing. Whereas then there's another mother that is playing with her child and gets on her smartphone and starts scrolling through social media and quickly seeing the lives, these kind of perfect lives of many other parents and others on social media, and begins to compare herself to them and feel down and worse about her own parenting and much, much more. And you can just already see the difference just because we started focusing on the actual content of what is happening, the context of that use and more, as opposed to just thinking of this broad umbrella term of screen time. because those have very different effects. So it's really much more helpful to focus on what's being done. And then there are different types of social media. I mean, in our own work, we've really been able to look at, we've tried to look at some of the differences in terms of, you've got these media sharing or consuming kinds of apps where you'll primarily see a lot of photos and videos like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Then there's also like general social networking apps where there are lots of different embedded features like Facebook. But again, to really understand the effects, you can't just clump them together like that either. You've got to look at what's being done on the app, because what the person typically does on the app, what types of accounts they follow, the other interactions that they've had with the app in the past are really what becomes important, because that's going to begin to influence what the algorithm feeds them, whether they're going to obtain support or not from other people, whether the content's going to be uplifting or take them in a different direction. And we've found in our interviews with parents specifically that they have better mental health and feel a lot happier when they feel in control of their use. So in other words, those times when they're not getting stuck in some of those in mindless scrolling, or feeling like they've wasted their time, or when they use it for the purpose that they intended to. So they got on it to get that support from a friend. That's what they did, and then they got back off. But it can be very difficult. Like we've already started saying, it can be very difficult when using social media to use it in the ways that we're happy with, due to the way that those apps are often designed. For example, there's a lot of manipulative design that goes into it, dark patterns and other design features that are embedded. For example, it might be surprising to anyone, but I've never found the end of TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. I'm still looking. So there's an example of, like, there's no what we call stoppage cue. There's nothing that cues your mind that it's time to stop. And there's lots of little features like that, and all of them are intended to increase the amount of time that you spend on the app. So I often see in the samples, even of parents that I study, that self-control isn't enough, often of no fault of our own. So I would say to everyone tonight as well, that please know that we're all in this together, and it's completely normal to struggle with use at times, or to fall into unintended use and need to reassess digital habits kind of over and over again over time.
Thank you, Brenda. Yes, that's a good point. Lucía.
Yes, I think the data we get from teens, it's all, of course, constantly evolving, which also makes it hard to study. The primarily use of time is definitely for social media, and today, and again, this is constantly changing, today it's TikTok, where youth are spending most time. Youth describe TikTok as different from other social media apps in that there's less friction. It's an app that really knows what you want, so the algorithms learn very quickly what you want, and it's constantly feeding you these very short, very engaging videos. So TikTok is very appealing on the one hand and very hard to stop using. Youth are spending a lot of time on YouTube, and we always struggle to classify as whether it is social media or not. There are some people that are really engaged in the comments and in the networks. Some people are just consuming the videos, but people spend a lot of time in YouTube as well. And the third use of time, of course, are gaming platforms. In terms of the three big social media platforms right now with youth in the US, it's definitely going to be TikTok first. Instagram, which is TikTok and Instagram are both, and Snap, they're very visual. So that for teens might be driving them to be very consumed with how they look like, with uploading the perfect photo, with editing photos to share. A lot of this phenomena that Brandon was talking about, social comparison, that we feel as adults, youth, of course, feel it as well. Yes, and a lot of these very short videos that are very, very engaging. So yes, so each each social media platform has its own challenges, its own affordances, its own good things and bad things. Snap, for example, we hear a lot from youth that that's a platform, it's their less favorite one, but they all feel compelled to be there because that's where a lot of the social hierarchies of school are manifested. Snap has the streaks that you need to keep going. We hear from a lot of youth who go on holiday and they'll give their password to a friend for the friend to keep going, to keep the Snap streaks going. So yeah, again, each different platform is having these design features that are driving our use in particular ways.
Wow. David.
So in the interest of time, I'll be really brief as number 3. As a thought experiment, we could imagine, I'm glad this question raises the significance of screen time and also social media, but we can imagine a world in not too long when screens are not as important and social media is not as important, but we could be still having the same kinds of problems. So in other words, because basically what we have created, this is I'm now wearing my philosopher of technology hat, is a highly technologized society, which is trying to serve certain aims. And we've, as in fact, Lucía, I think first mentioned it, we're being incentivized to stay online. We're living in an accelerating, highly stress-inducing world. We're expected to do more and more. So, and guess what? AI is coming along, something that we're now all going to have to familiarize ourselves with, even as it continues to change moment by moment. But one could imagine a world of AI assistants that is not even necessarily primarily based on screens, where the same values and philosophy of acceleration and overload, incentivization, and keeping us tied into a production and consumption would continue. So we have to be careful not to get only, we should care about the particular technologies, but we shouldn't get stuck on them as we try to figure out meaningful ways to proceed despite the problems.
Thank you, David.
Thanks. Lucy, I'd love to hear, and our audience wants to hear perspectives on both the positive and detrimental effects of screen time and social media.
And I guess, as I've already alluded to, it's very hard to have a one-size-fits-all. I really like a framework that I'll share from the American Academy of Pediatrics, their Center on Social Media and Youth and Mental Health. So they ask us to think about the 5 C's when thinking about the positives and negatives, right? So the first, and we always need to start from the first C, which is the child, right? All children are different. They will then have different risks and benefits from media, right? So you need to really think, who is my child? What's their personality, their temperament? What are they attracted to? How does this affect them? And you'll likely see that one child might respond very differently to another, even if they're siblings, right? So we need to start from their individual susceptibilities, their individual strengths to really understand the impacts of social media. Of course, the content, that's the second C, the content that youth are exposed to varies very widely. It goes from very high content, very high quality content to content that can be violent, that can be very graphic, unrealistic beauty standards. So there's a lot of content. So not all content is created equal. So we need to pay a lot of attention to that type of content. The other C, and that's, I think, very aligned with Lily's research, is connected to being calm, right? How are we regulating emotions? How are children and adolescents regulating their emotions? Are we using social media as a coping tool? Is that interfering with our ability to learn how to cope with our emotions? We see a lot of young children who then will have a tantrum when we remove the screens because we haven't really allowed them to practice the skills to calm themselves down. The fourth C is this idea of crowding out. What is social media or smartphones or gaming? What is it replacing, right? We know for adolescents, we have pillars, the most important things. So young people should be sleeping for 9 hours in the case of adolescents, maybe 10 to 12 in the case of younger children every day. And we know that screens are really interfering with our sleep quality and duration. We know that young people should be physically active, moving their bodies in any way they want for 1 hour per day. And sometimes social media is displacing this physical movement. We know that we need downtime. We need time with family and friends in person. And we worry when social media is displacing that. And time for homework, right? We hear time and time again that one of the biggest stressors for youth is their homework and their schoolwork and how much demand schools is placing on them. So is social media, is gaming, is screen time crowding out these important aspects? And the last C to really understand is, and I think encouraging all families to keep an open channel of communication with their children, right? We need to talk about media early and often. We need to be involved in our youth's lives online as we are involved in their lives with in-person friends or at school. As families, we need to really be involved in what's happening online because youth will need monitoring, will need scaffolding, will need support. So if there's no communication happening, it's very hard to address this. And I will stop here and we'll send a link to this wonderful resource.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, we have asked each of our panelists to send any information and resources that they have. So we'll include those links in the email our audience gets. Brandon, can you say a little bit about positive and detrimental effects of screen time and social media?
Yeah, I mean, first off, amen, right, to what Lucia is saying. That's the best way to describe a lot of what we see. But I'll take it and focus a little bit on parents for a minute because it's quite nuanced and integrated into daily life for them. So you can never view it as only a bad thing. There could be a variety of positives, like the ability to be able to connect and form a sense of community with others. Connect with family, friends, others, to navigate all of the woes and stresses of parenthood and find those individuals that'll be able to validate your experiences and much more that can lead to reduced feelings of isolation and loneliness and a normalization of all of the difficulties that come along with parenting. So that's incredibly important. The ability to be able to find parenting information on a whim, right when you need it, in the moment. To do a quick Google search and now to interact with an AI chatbot or some other type of AI to be able to have exactly what you need when you need it. And in fact, when the parents that we've interviewed have often said that they don't know how they survive without having those resources. The ability to be able well, there's just a lot that comes along with parenting and family logistics and being able to manage all of those different moving pieces. Technology can really assist with that in terms of calendar apps and reminders and planning tools and like organizing school communication and many other things. You have moments of escape because parenting can be really emotionally intense and very stressing at times. And so for some, having a few minutes of being able to scroll through TikTok, for example, or listen to something while doing the dishes can offer that mental break that they needed to then be able to re-engage with their children and be more emotionally available the entire rest of the day. So that can be really helpful. But to flip that, and those are just a few examples. There's many other things we could talk about. There's also negatives like that disconnection and technoference, right? If it begins to crowd out family relationships or interrupt our face-to-face time with our children and pulls you away, then that can begin to influence how children are feeling and increase a parent's own sense of guilt and disconnection, and you just often be more unhappy, really, in a lot of ways. You've got all the social comparison that can occur. So even if in those moments of escape or other times you might get on that device, but then you begin comparing yourself to others, and especially for mothers, can amplify a lot of feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, shame, things like that. And I talked about those moments of escape could be potentially empowering at times, but the problem is, and we often hear this in our research with parents, that some of them will say, well, I do this, I get on my device when I'm feeling really stressed out and it helps me to calm down. But then I come back from my device use with my family and all of the issues and everything that was happening, it's all still there. And so it didn't actually help in the end. It wasn't maybe the best thing that I could have done in that moment. to calm myself down or do what I needed to be able to cope with those various behaviors, because now it all still exists.
Yeah, thanks. I know that feeling. It's all still there.
I think we all do.
David, what would you like to add?
Nothing. I actually thought what Lucía and Brandon said was great. And I think in the interest of time, I'll just pass. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And actually, I'm thinking about the time. I'm looking at the time. It's flying by, and I'm enjoying it so much. We're going to jump ahead to a couple of the questions that. So I'm letting the panel know that we're moving ahead a couple of questions.
Very good. Thanks, Lily. Let's see. David, when looking at research that highlights both positive and negative outcomes from social media use, they come to similar conclusions about what can help mental health. It seems like the research can be interpreted in different ways. What is your take on the research, and what are healthy ways to engage with our devices and with social media?
Well, first, let me just say my heart goes out to parents around this, because it's so confusing. And not only because the studies aren't clear and they're still coming out and they're not definitive, but because everything's changing so fast, right? So, but I mean, I'm going to come back to the main theme that I've been sounding so far. The challenge we face is that we don't have definitive studies. I mean, look at the fight. I mean, no one's mentioned Jonathan Haidt's name explicitly yet, I don't think, and his now, his best-selling book about the anxious generation, and then the fight that's going on within the research community about whether he's properly interpreted his studies, right? So, what's a person to do? Well, so the experts themselves are not actually all lining up in agreement about this. But even if we were to have more definitive studies, from the perspective that I represent, the problem would still be that results are never going to look like, well, this is exactly what you should do with your child. I imagine that Lucía and Brandon would agree. So there's always going to be a gap between what the studies say and how we try to interpret them, and then how they are to be applied. It seems to me, again, not having studied parents and children, that there's no substitute for example, one of the C's, which is ongoing communication and learning about what your child is doing and making decisions based on their unique situation, hopefully within a community of people, for example, of other parents and teachers and so on, who are themselves trying to figure out how to do this. In other words, all I'm really saying is, it seems to me the process of discernment, which is a process of ongoing learning, is the way to go. But maybe my esteemed colleagues can provide some more detailed suggestions for how to proceed with the range of studies that are continuing to come out.
Yeah, Lucía, would you like to weigh in?
Certainly, I completely agree with David, how research is ongoing and we don't have any definite answers, and I don't think we'll ever have them. I think coming back to this idea of that one size does not fit all, and really finding what works best for your family, for your child, taking a developmental approach, knowing that the child will continue to develop, and what a 5-year-old requires is not the same as what that same 5-year-old will require when they're 10, 13, 17. Right? So when we talk about healthy ways to engage with our devices and with social media, I think there's important questions. One, coming back to this idea of mindful use, of intentionality, right? Who is deciding to use the device? Is it really you driving the process, or is it this manipulative design? This idea of meaningful, and meaningful will mean different things for different people, right? I live far away from my family. For me, a 1-hour conversation with my parents in WhatsApp is very meaningful. I connect with them, we stay in touch. But 1 hour, for example, for me, scrolling through Instagram, I might not get the same reward, right? So what is meaningful? What is smart use for you? I think children, adolescents require some scaffolding, some support in asking these questions, in trying them out. Yes, now we need to do a lot of training and modeling because youth, whenever we let them have their own social media accounts, oftentimes we just like release them to the wild. So a lot of the work we're doing is to really prepare them. We now work with like a simulated Instagram, and I'll send the link as well, social media test drive, where it's a simulated account, it's not yours. And then there's 12 modules where you can go there and experience some of the sensations you might feel. For example, if you see pictures of your friends hanging out without you, right? That would generate very strong emotions in you. And then those strong emotions might drive you to react in very amplified ways, or perhaps being aggressive or leaving a comment that then is going to be there forever, right? So there's a lot of practicing of these skills before we're using social media. In terms of self-regulation, in terms of etiquette, a lot of things that we need to be modeling. Understand that there's youth with certain vulnerabilities. So we know, for example, youth who might have body image concerns already, they're going to engage with media in less healthy ways. There's going to be a lot of social comparison, a lot of maybe going to these groups that might promote anorexia or bulimia practices, for example. We know, on the other hand, for example, we know that youth with social anxiety might find it a very helpful tool in actually crafting a message, and before sending it, having a time to think about it. Yeah, so a lot of time to practice, a lot of scaffolding, a lot of constant communication in supporting youth to have this meaningful, this smart, and this safe engagement with social media, but that is a very individual definition.
Brandon, anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, so I'll just add a little bit on here, in addition to what's been said of I think focusing on what our screen use is beginning to interfere with can often be a great place to start. If we find that it's interfering with our sleep or physical activity, school and work performance, face-to-face communication, connection with our family, connection with our friends, our hobbies or other interests, or if it's becoming compulsive in some way, then those would be some indicators that something might be a little unhealthy with what's happening in the moment. And then it's time to begin searching for what it is that's driving some of that behavior. And to focus just a second on parents, there is so much guilt and shame in all of parenting. And so I just want to again say that we already experience a ton of guilt and shame over everything. So please just know that it's okay to use technology at times around your children, okay? Let's just get that out there in the open. It happens, it's normal. It is normal, you are normal. Instead of beating yourself over that phone use, I think really what's more important is to begin focusing on what are you trying to gain, or what would you like to gain when you're using your phone use around your children? So what are the times when you're doing that where it actually feels very empowering to you? Because those are likely the things that you want to capitalize on and keep doing. But then also begin to think about what are the aspects of your phone use that don't match with the way that you want to be with a parent, or the way that you're trying to be. Now, be realistic here. Again, it'll happen that you get on and that you might get pulled into some sort of use that you didn't mean to. But beginning to sit and think about those things and be mindful in that way to assess that, then you can start at least to slowly make some very small changes around trying to make a few more of those empowering kinds of things happen more often, and reduce some of the guilt-inducing ones, while also understanding that if you struggle with self-control, we're all struggling with self-control, and that's totally normal, as devices have been designed to keep trying to draw you in like that.
Thanks, Brandon. And actually that makes me follow up with Lucía on a question, just speaking a little bit about some of the the benefits to letting teens and preteens use social media. And I want to connect that with a question that I'm seeing from one of our attendees. And we're talking a lot about the the manipulative nature of some of these systems, but also that some of them have built in some protections and locks, features that like allow you to limit your time, things like that. So could you say a little bit both about what are some of the benefits of letting our teens use the social media, and then maybe how we could benefit from using some of the built-in features as well?
Certainly. So Sonia Livingstone talks of this idea that I love of this ladder of online participation, right? So at the bottom of the ladder, I think the easiest ways in which we can benefit from social media or digital media in general is entertainment, right? And I think there can be a lot of positive, very healthy entertainment. There can be cool videos. You can be learning, following up on your hobbies, learning to do things. Where there is a lot of power in the positives of social media is in social connection. And I think we all experienced this even as adults during the pandemic, right? Imagine what it had been, what our experience would have been without being able to stay in touch through these digital mediums, right? When we couldn't meet in person. And I think in the pandemic, we realized how it's hard. It's actually hard to maintain your networks online, to nourish them, and how adolescents are just so savvy and so used to doing watch parties online and sharing and maintaining relationships. So I think there's a lot of power in social connection. One of the things we're studying in my lab right now is this idea of online-only friends. So there's friends that you might never meet in person. And it's, I don't know, maybe 30–40% of our samples report having these types of friends. They mostly meet them through gaming platforms. There might be other kids their age who live in different countries. And with these friends, it's not exactly as an in-person friendship would be, but it allows them to connect around similar interests and things they're excited about. So I think there's a lot of power there. Of course, social media is a wonderful source of information and learning. There's a lot of good content out there, a lot of misinformation out there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of useful things there. When there's topics that have stigma for youth, for example, around mental health, around sexual reproductive health, other questions about health, it's likely that they're going to go first to social media accounts and the online world to find answers to many of the questions they might have. So I think it's incredibly powerful to carry all of human knowledge in this powerful computer in our pockets, especially for adolescents in which they're exploring their many identities. I think social media can be a wonderful place for identity exploration and self-expression. And perhaps the story that I like the most is really the most, at the top of the ladder of online participation, we have citizenship, right? And I think of Greta Thunberg, for example, this adolescent who jumpstart this movement against climate change using the power of social media, right? But how do we empower youth to climb throughout all those rungs of online participation, this ladder? Because it won't just happen by magic, right? We can't just hand out tablets and expect things, youth to have the skills to do these things. So that comes back to this idea of scaffolding, of education, of regulation that we're starting to see a lot of conversation about, and age-appropriate design. And I think this taps a bit into what some platforms are trying to do. I think there's been a lot of pressure for them to make some changes. And yes, most platforms now have family centers. Some are easier to use than others. We definitely encourage parents to do them, to use them, to get familiar with monitoring, not spying, monitoring with consent, explaining why you're monitoring, establishing family boundaries that are developmentally appropriate. And using these tools can be helpful sometimes.
Thank you. All right, let's see. And this question, we'll go to Brandon first. What suggestions do you have to curb social media addiction or spending too much time on devices for adults and teens?
Thanks. I feel like one of the easiest things that I've seen for families to be able to implement is screen-free times or zones. So that's just that idea that it can be really difficult to manage all of our different tech habits, but it's much easier to focus on a specific time of the day or a specific location in your home, and to decide that all screens and smartphones and those devices will be put away for that particular time period. So whether that's at dinner or whether that's in a child's bedroom or wherever, families can adapt that. That's also what's really great about it, is you can adapt it to your own situation and context and what feels right to you. But we often see that families really benefit and like that idea, and it usually works pretty well for them. Now, like I've said before, much of the research is showing that self-control is not enough when it comes to device use, especially smartphones and social media use, often because of the way that they're designed. So if you find yourself struggling with device use or social media use, I would say you can use some of the tools that are embedded in our phones at this point, like Apple Screen Time or Android Digital Wellbeing. So you can, this is like, again, kind of like a bottom of the ladder kind of thing, but like setting up time limits on specific apps can be a good place to start. Now, that won't be the end of everything, the end all. That can often be very annoying. It can be easy to turn off and get around. But you have to start somewhere. And if you're finding that you're struggling, you have to begin setting some boundaries for yourself to at least get you nudged in the right direction, or to nudge you to remember that you are trying to change something. And I would also encourage everyone to remember that it's okay to regularly need to adjust those limits into what works best with your life. So don't feel like a failure if you don't get it right the first time. Essentially, I'd say, and this is kind of going back to some of what David was already talking about with this mindfulness idea, that we need to take a lot of what has become unconscious and so because they're habits. We form really strong habits with these devices and social media as well. And so we needed to make those unconscious habits become things that are conscious choices, intentional choices again. And there are a lot of ways to try to do that. If we're trying to think about on that theme again of apps or having our technology work for us a little bit, there are some apps out there that one could try to use to help. One that I'm thinking of right now is called OneSec, so ONESEC. And that one specifically allows you to select the specific apps that you're struggling with and that you want to intervene on. And then when you would later go and tap on those, so let's say you tap on Instagram, a screen will kind of slowly come up and down and give you time to actually breathe and think. And you can actually set the text too of whatever you want to say to yourself in that moment. And then it makes you tap on whether you want to go into that app or not. So it's essentially, that also can become really annoying, especially if it is something that you're used to getting right to in the moment. It's an unconscious habit. But there's only one way to break a habit really like that, and that you first have to get yourself to slow down and bring that back into your conscious mind and break some of those cycles. So those are a few things that I would say.
Yeah, really helpful. David, what would you add?
I just want to add one thing. There are people who need professional help with this, right? I don't know what the percentage is. There are people who, young people and older people too, who simply need professional help in order to, these are people who, for example, can't hold down a job or can't go to school any longer or no longer able to sleep. There is actually an internet and gaming addiction center in the Seattle area that I know of, and I know one of the two founders. It's called Restart, RESTART. Hillary Cash is a dear friend of mine. She's a clinical psychologist who co-created this center about 20 years ago. I'm afraid it's the only one I know. So and I believe in Hillary's work. So that's always a resource for parents. I've known of parents who actually had to do some kind of much deeper intervention. So that's always a possibility.
Thank you. Lucía?
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what has been said so far. I think these tools bring so much convenience to our lives. So a lot of the work is actually making things harder for ourselves. So a lot of these things are now frictionless, right? In my phone, I can play music, I can read the news, I can do my work, I can take pictures. And if we want youth to not be as reliant on their devices, maybe it's time to go back to having multiple things to do multiple tasks, right? For example, an easy one to adapt is to have actually like not a smartwatch, but just a regular watch, to have like a physical alarm instead of having our phones be the first thing that we open up in the morning, and we already have that anxiety generating email from work. Going back to cameras, and we've seen Gen Z go back to like actual physical cameras, music players. Yeah, so as much as we can introduce some friction between us and just how easy it is to use a lot of these platforms, I myself, like Brandon was saying, have installed like blockers in my own phone where I say, well, I don't want to use Instagram from 9 to 5. Please block it for me, because I myself, even though I work in this topic, also struggle a lot with this. An idea that Brandon alluded to is we now talk a lot about building family media plans. And again, I'll share this resource because the American Academy of Pediatrics has this great tool to create your own plan for your own family that works well. I love this idea of screen-free zones and times. I think that's easy to implement. And for parents, especially of younger children, I think being very explicit of what we're doing behind the screen. I don't think for kids it's that evident that behind the screen, before when we were growing up, I would see my parents read the newspaper or read a book physically or talk on the phone, and I would overhear how they were communicating with others and how they were like answering the phone, for example. A lot of these things that we take for granted, we should really verbalize, right? Let's say mom is busy right now. I'm answering work email on my phone. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm not scrolling through Instagram. You know what? I'm gonna take a picture. Are you fine with me taking a picture and uploading it to Instagram or social media, right? Being really verbalizing everything we're doing behind the screens.
Thank you.
Thanks. Those are so helpful and they're so great. And we have so many amazing questions in the Q&A, and I'm having trouble kind of picking through them. Honestly, there's really a lot of questions here, and I'm hoping maybe the panel members will stay on at the end and type some answers in, because we'll run out of time. But one question came from a youth or a child who's asking that they're struggling to get their mom to understand how much friends matter, since I have a long distance best friend, and how she's, only allows me an hour for time for everything. And it's hard to save time between messaging and friends and all these things. And this youth is curious if we believe that's a good way to manage screen time. Lucía, you probably want to take that one.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, I agree. I think we were sort of talking about this idea of these online friends that you might have or might have not met in person. I think coming back to this idea of talking to your parents often about what you're doing online, to also let them sort of into your world so that they can understand like the good things that excite you about being online, the things that concern you, the things that might be a bit more weird. So I think opening up the conversation with your parents around this, yeah, I think this idea that you can take from this panel that like really the number of minutes online is not a good measure for what is happening online, and really want to talk about the quality of what's happening online, the quality of your interactions, the meaningfulness of it all. Yeah, maybe you could talk to your parents if it makes sense, instead of having, well, you could say, well, maybe I can have dedicated time to video chat with this friend, and that counts separate from everything else that I'm doing online. But again, for your parents, they just see you on the screen, right? So I think it'd be helpful as family communication to tell them what you're having, everything that you're doing online, and how much you're getting out of it. I think that could be a good start.
I'm going to put two questions together here, because we got one very early on when David was talking about mindfulness as a way of like monitoring how you are feeling and thinking and responding when you're online. And a parent asked I'm not sure my 12-year-old can do that. But I'm going to link that with this question with trying to convince a parent, trying to convince my kids that screens are preventing them from being aware of the people and events around them, maybe muting their curiosity and preventing them from learning about themselves. And so this parent is asking, David, I will put this to you first to see if you have thoughts about what evidence is there for that. Is there support for that?
Great. Well, actually, I saw that first question. I'm glad we get to address the question about from the attendee who has a 12-year-old. I want to be really clear that because that there are developmental stages that people on this call know a lot more about than I do, and I wouldn't presume to understand how much mindfulness or what quality of attention a 12-year-old is capable of. So indeed, I think it's an open question, and it's an important question to recognize that some things are not possible at certain earlier ages. However, I have a story to tell you about a parent and with her two daughters that's actually relevant to this. In fact, this is a woman named Lily, who was a doctoral student in the iSchool, and I learned about these behaviors from her, and I spoke to her yesterday in preparation for this panel. Lily started to work with her two daughters around the age of, between the ages of 10 and 12, actually. So it's not about developing a mindfulness practice, but each of her daughters wanted at an early age or was considering going onto social media. And what Lily did was work with her daughters, of course, obviously at two different ages, I mean, two different points in time since they were, I don't know how many years apart, saying, okay, well, why don't we start to explore what it looks like for you to use social media? And she actually gave her daughters a series of questions to answer, right? And that was the beginning of a conversation. And in one case, the daughter decided she wasn't ready for social media. I don't remember whether it was Instagram or whatever it was. It might have been something earlier. And in the second case, the child did go on to it. So in fact, it is possible, clearly, as Lily's story illustrates, at least for some parents, to enter into real conversation with their children and figure out age-appropriate ways to get them to begin to investigate the technologies and maybe come back and even teach the parent about it.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. We have another question from Reese that's asking how to start advocating with schools and thinking about the use of cell phones and media in the classroom and how to start talking to schools or advocating at schools. Lucía, you're doing work in that area.
Yeah, and I'd be surprised if the school is not already thinking about this. I think it's at the forefront of many educators. As I said, we're seeing from last year to this year an increasing number of schools adopting these policies or making policies they already had either more explicit or more strict. So I'm sure some policies are coming soon. However, part of the research we're doing is that not all policies are going to be effective. Some policies, I think, might be too restrictive or have unintended consequences. As we said, there's a lot of positive of being online. So that's part of the research that we're doing, trying to understand when do policies work and what types of implementations are best. We keep hearing from, so we've just done a few surveys so far, and it's very interesting because the students have very different perceptions of the policies compared to their teachers. So teachers are actually much more in favor of these policies. Teachers, for example, want to see a more school-wide implementation of the policy. Currently, I think it's up to individual teachers to set up the policies in their classrooms. That consumes a lot of their time. That turns teachers into really having to police all the time. Put your phone away. What are you doing with the phone? It's very disruptive for teachers when they're trying to build relationships and actually focus on the learning and the teaching. So we are hearing from teachers that they want school-wide approaches. We are hearing from teachers something very interesting. This keeps coming up, that the schools have got back to being much louder. right? Because when I went to school, the hallways were very, very loud in passing periods because everyone was chatting. And in those tiny periods, you're practicing your social skills, you're learning something about your friend. But of course, during passing periods for a long time, young people have been going to their phones and they had become silent, right? But now they're becoming louder as young people are encouraged again to practice these social skills. So that's something exciting. Yeah, so I think each school will know what works best for them. I think schools really like that there's not this possibility that everyone's recording everything all the time. Young people do not like that. Teachers do not like that anything can go viral at any point. That there's always recording, taking pictures of teachers, of other students, that I think is very disruptive. So I think as long as that can be minimized, there's huge gains. But yeah, there's a lot of research in this area because yeah, we want to make sure that there's not negative unintended consequences of these policies.
Thanks, Lucia. There's a question in here that we're not going to answer live because we're running out of time, but I want to make sure that we let people know that you've typed questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get resources in the email that goes out that you can link to. But there's one request here. What are some trusted resources around communication about digital use? And so how parents can bridge the gap in talking with their teens. So we'll make sure we're to include in the email that goes out some suggestions for those things. I would love to invite our each panel member to offer a closing thought briefly. David, would you like to start us off?
Well, simply, I want to say in closing, first of all, how grateful I am to all of us and to the parents and the young people who are on. These kinds of conversations are part of what we really need. And we're, in fact, what seems clear to me is there's going to be no end to the learning that we have to do. It's going to be lifelong because the technologies are going to keep changing, and we're going to have to keep working to rein in the technologies to make them safe and effective and beneficial. So I'm delighted that we're trying to do some of that work together tonight.
Thanks, David. Brandon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on here as well. This has been a great conversation. I think what I would leave everyone with is just to remember that we really need to stop talking about just screen time in general, that's too broad of a term. Not all tech use is bad. It's quite normal for all of us to be on our devices at many different times throughout the day, doing a lot of different things. And so so we shouldn't be extremely judgmental of parents using their devices around their children. We shouldn't be extremely judgmental of teens using their devices at various times throughout the day. I would also just encourage everyone to not give up. It can feel really disorienting, and parents can get really down. It can be really difficult to manage all of these things. It's very, like David said, it's a very confusing world to try to deal with, because many of us didn't even deal with these things before, because everything, the tech industry and all this moves so quickly. So to just keep trying to keep those lines of communication open with our teens, and to not come at it from that angle that what you're doing is bad, or just immediately jumping in every time, be like, what are you doing? Or why are you on your device? Or but instead to let them talk about the things that they enjoy doing, and the connections that they're able to make, and the things that they really love about it, and try to see those things, those positives as well.
Thanks, Brandon. Lucia.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. So one of my takeaways would be to really reframe the question. We shouldn't be asking if social media good or bad, but it's really how can we guide teens to use it in healthy, balanced ways? How can we equip our teens with digital habits, thinking critically, managing their time, setting boundaries, thinking about this idea of mindfulness and meaningfulness, not just restricting, right? As of course, there's certain signs of concern, right? If youth are really not engaging socially, if they're not doing their homework or they're failing in grades, if they're not sleeping, if we see signs of concern, of course, that's a clear point for intervention. We want to be partners, not really police, right? So this idea that you are co-creating a family tech plan, setting boundaries that come from care and affection, not because you want to spy on them or keep tabs on them, but because you care. Building trust and insight early, especially late childhood, early adolescence is a time where still youth are quite responsive and receptive to their parents. So that's a time to really build these healthy habits early on. And you don't need to be an expert in technology. You need to be an expert in your child, and you already are, right? So sometimes we can get confused because we can sometimes undermine ourselves because I don't understand what this new concept means or what this new hashtag is, but you are an expert on your family, on your child, and on what's best for them. And that's where you're coming to this conversation. So you're already powerful, and I know it can be daunting, it can be scary, but you are the expert in your family.
Thanks. I really appreciate the thoughts that you've shared. Really resonating with approaching this with mindfulness and building in that even family mindfulness around how we're noticing ourselves and how we're using it, social media or media or devices, and when we're feeling like we're benefiting from it and paying attention to when we might be doing other things. So I really appreciate all the perspective you've brought to that. Also some of the benefits that we see, but also some of the costs to relationships and how to try to navigate that as a family. I'm loving the idea of family device discussions and agreements. So thanks for sharing all these wonderful ideas. Thank you to the participants who've joined us tonight, and for many of the questions. We are going to record these questions and see if our panel members would be willing to offer some responses over email. And then remember that you'll be getting an email asking for your review of the event. We really appreciate your feedback, and you'll be getting another email with the recording of the event. So with that, I want to really thank our panel members for their wisdom and insight, and just offering us such valuable guidance around using social media and technology. And thank everyone for being here tonight.